So let's start with Mecca. Why do I want to start with Mecca? You'll see why. Mecca is enormously important. Remember, Islam is dependent on 3 legs. You take out one of the legs, the other 2 collapse. So if you start with the book, the man, and the place for the 3 legs, if you start to confront Mecca, it starts to teeter. Once you shut down Mecca, everything else collapses. Because if there is no Mecca, then it doesn't matter who Muhammad is or what the name is or where you find him, he's not in Mecca. Right? And if he's not in Mecca, then what Muhammad are we talking about? And it doesn't matter what Quran we're looking at, it's not from Mecca. If it's not from Mecca, bingo, then you got a different Quran. So let's shut down Mecca first. Let's begin with Mecca and let's see what we can find. Now this is what they claim. According to the traditions, according to standard Islamic narrative, Mecca is where Adam and Eve are thrown down to. In chapter 7, verse 24 in the Quran, they're thrown out of the Garden of Eden down to Mecca. So obviously this is the oldest city in history, right? You have to have people to have a city. And there's no one before Adam and Eve. So it's obviously the oldest city in history. It's where Abraham lived according to chapter 21 of the Quran, verse 51 to 71. That's 1900 BC. Therefore, it had to have existed then. Sorry, let's go back. It's also the center of trade, north, south, east, and west. So it should be one of the best known and best documented places in history. Now, it's also, according to the Quran, the center of history. But here's the problem. Open up the Quran and see if you can find that word Mecca in it. You'll only find it one time, in chapter 48, verse 24. So it's not a book, it's not a place that's referred to very often, except for once. It's the place of the prophet. So let's look and see what it says about the place of the prophet in the Quran. Well, that's the mother of all settlements, according to chapter 6. It's where Adam and Eve were cast to, according to chapter 7. It's where Abraham lived, according to chapter 21. It's where Muhammad was born. And it was also where Mecca became the center of the Qibla, the direction of prayer, according to chapter 2. Now, the above imply people have lived there from the very beginning. Yet the only reference we can find is chapter 48, 24. If it's such an important place, why is there only one reference? If you look at the traditions, which are written much later, they're written in the 9th and 10th century, Mecca now does exist. That's not a problem. But take a look at where it places it. Notice what the traditions say. This place of the prophet, which is Mecca, is in a valley and has a parallel valley. It has streams. It has ruins of a pillar of salt right outside it. It has fields and trees and grass and fruit and clay and loam and olive trees. Folks, that looks like it's pretty verdant. Am I correct? Lots of vegetation, lots of water. Look at Mecca. There's no streams. There's none of these in Mecca, and there never has been. Historically, it's never had water. So obviously, whatever the traditions are referring to, it's not the Mecca we know today. When you look and unpack the Quran, and you look at it, you will notice that an awful lot of it refers to geographical locations. 65 geographical references, but only 9 places are named. And over again, it refers to these people from Ad. 23 times these people from Ad, that's the biblical Uz. 24 times the people from Thamud, that would be the Nabateans. 7 times the people from Midian, they're the Midianites. But take a look on the map and see where they're all placed. They're up in Jordan. Mecca is at the very bottom of the map. Do you see it down there? There's 600 miles. If this prophet were having daily contact with these people from Ad Thamud in Midian, he'd have to have a helicopter or a jet to get up and back in 1,200 miles in just one day. They didn't have helicopters back then. Can you see a problem, folks? Obviously, whoever this prophet is who's having this relationship with all these people either had to live up there or this is nothing more than fiction. When we look at the prophets, prophet after prophet, Adam and Eve, Seth, Ishmael, Noah, Hud, Saleh, Queen of Sheba, Daniel, they were all buried in Mecca. Over almost 300 prophets are buried in Mecca. Now, when they're buried in a kneeling position so that they continue to be preserved in that kneeling position. If that were the case, then they still should be there today. Am I correct? So look at all the enormous amount of building that's going on around Mecca. That building that you see there, that tower, is the 4th highest building in the world. When you look at it, you will notice all the buildings around it. You have to have huge foundations in order to build something that high. As they're building these foundations, they should have come across one prophet. They haven't found one, suggesting that none of these prophets were buried there. If the above were true, this would mean that almost all of the Bible would have to be rewritten, as all of our prophets are 600 to 1,000 miles further south. So when is the first reference you can find to Mecca? It comes from the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius Continuato Byzantia Arabica, 741 A.D. Muhammad died in 632, if he even lived. That's over 100 years later that we get the first reference of him. What about the maps? Is Mecca on any map? Ptolemy is the best source to go to because he wrote the geography of Arabia, and there are those who've taken his geography and put maps together, like Reinhard Holle in the 1400s. Notice when you look at the map, Mecca is not there. Here's another one put together by Laurent Fries in 1541. Notice Mecca is not there as well. Here's another one putting what Ptolemy said, put together in 1571, put together by Sebastian Munster. Same problem. Mecca just doesn't exist on any of these maps. Here's a 7th century map that has been redacted back to the 7th century. Do you see Mecca on it? I don't. Here's another one, redacted back to the 7th century. Can you find Mecca on any of these maps? Not one. So certainly Ptolemy didn't know about this place. When you look at the Qiblas, these are all the direction of prayers. Now remember, in chapter 2 of the Quran, all the Qiblas were directed to Mecca according to the Quran itself. Dan Gibson, who's done the best work on this, and he has gone through over 100 mosques, and he's gone to all their Qiblas, and notice what he has found. From the 7th century up until the 8th century, up until 706, every Qibla is facing Petra. Not one Qibla is facing Mecca. We're in the 8th century. We still can't find any mosque facing Mecca. It's not till 715 that the first mosque faced Mecca. What does that tell you? For 100 years, they never knew where Mecca was. In fact, look where all these Qiblas are. They're right there in Medina, in China, in India, in Syria, in Egypt, in Israel, in Jordan, all over the world. And yet none of them seem to know where Mecca was. For over 100 years, they didn't know where Mecca was. Were they that inept? Or did Mecca even exist? Now we come to the trade route theory, and this is where Montgomery Watt has helped out the Muslims. He tried to help them out to show that you can find Mecca if you just look at the trade route. The trade went through Mecca. Now the trade used to go this way, right up through the Persian Gulf, to Basra, across Iraq, across Syria, over into Lebanon. But then you had the Sassanians who started warring against the Byzantines. And for 200 years, from the 5th, 6th, and 7th century, they shut down the Persian Gulf because of these wars. So the trade had to be rerouted. So what Montgomery Watt says is they went from India. And remember, all the trade's coming from China and India. They can't go north because of the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas. So they come across the Arabian Sea. They come to Aden there in the south. And they go zip 1,250 miles up to Gaza in the north. Now notice Mecca's halfway. And so he said Mecca controlled that trade, and that's how Mecca became important. How many of you believe that? No one's going to raise their hands? You know why? Because I'm going to shut it down. But I'm not going to shut it down. Dr. Patricia Corona shut this down. This woman, Danish, read and wrote 15 archaic languages. How many of you could read and write 15 archaic languages? Probably the greatest scholar of her day. She just died a number of years ago. She was my authority. She was the one that helped me when I started my doctorate there in United Kingdom. And she looked at this map and she saw two problems. Let's see if you see the same two problems. This is the first one. She said, hold on a minute. If you're taking all the goods off in Aden and you're going up along what we call the Western Plateau where the oases are, you'd have to go up to Taif. And then from Taif, you have to go down to Mecca, 3,000 feet, and then from Mecca, you've got to go back up to Yathrib, and then from Yathrib on up to Tabuk, Khaybar, and then on up to Gaza in the north. Do you see a detour there? Can you see the detour? Let me emphasize exactly why she's saying this. Let's look at this topographical map, and let's just put these cities that are on the trade route. There's Aden, there's Sana'a, there's Najran, there's Taif, there's Yathrib, Tabuk, Petra, and then on up to Gaza. You notice they're all on the Western Plateau. Are you seeing that? Can you see it from this topographical map? So where's Mecca? Bingo, right there. 3,000 feet down from Taif. Let me give you another map. Here's another one, a topographical line map. There's Aden, there's Sana'a, there's Najran, there's Taif. Now you can see Yathrib, there's Tabuk, Petra, and Gaza. So where's Mecca? Bingo. Now can you see? It's way off the Western Plateau. It had no water. Why would you go from Taif down 3,000 feet to a city or a place that had no water and no food for your camels, and then come back up 3,000 feet to get up to Yathrib? So that was the first problem. But here's the second problem. She said, why in the world would they even get their material off in Aden and go 1,250 miles by land when they have a waterway on the left? Why wouldn't you just stay on ship? Even today, look how all our goods are sent all over the world. They're sent by ship, are they not? It's the cheapest way to send anything. And you've got the Red Sea there on the left. So why didn't they go on the Red Sea? Now she's clever because she reads and writes 15 languages. She went back to all the trading documents from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, all the way up to the 7th century, something no Muslim has ever done. And she wrote a book called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam in 1987 and got death threats because of what she found. This is what she found. She said, when you go and watch the trade, it comes across the Arabian Sea over to Aden. Yeah, it did stop in Aden. They would get provisions there, but it did stop there. They wouldn't take off any goods there. They would go up into the Red Sea. They would go to Agilis, and she found Agilis over and over again. And then from Agilis, went up the Red Sea, on up to Petra, and then from Petra to Gaza, and then from Gaza right across the Mediterranean world. That's what she found. But she didn't go far enough. That was in 1987. We have found something else. See, what she didn't realize is what part of the Red Sea and what side of the Red Sea did they go up? To do that, you need to look at topographical maps from space, and you need to see where the channels are. Do you see the dark blue line there, right in the middle of the Red Sea? There, I'm going to put a red line on it so you can see it even better. That's where the big ships go today. But back in the 7th century, they didn't have big ships. So where did they go? They went where the orange lines are, the golden lines. Those are the channels that the boats use. Notice they're not on the Arabian side, they're on the African side. Am I correct? So, unlike the East Arabian shore, which was arid and dry with no fresh water and thus few people, the West African shore had plenty of fresh water and had larger populations. What's more, the West Coast had easily accessible ports. We know their names. Here they are. The ports along them are Asab, Agilis, continue on Suakin, Berenice, and Safaga. Look at the dates. They all predate Islam. Notice they're all 1 day's boat ride apart. So they would go in every night to shelter. These have been around since the 3rd century BC. On the Red Sea side, on the Arabian side of the Red Sea, the only port that we know of is called Yanbu, which supported Yathrib. So what about Jeddah, which supports Mecca? Muslims have always asked me, well then didn't Jeddah exist also? Dr. Joran Halting, who is the world authority on Jeddah, wrote his book on it. And if you look at his book, he says Jeddah did not exist until the 8th century AD. It was created because Mecca was created. Mecca had no water, therefore it needed provisions. That's why they created Jeddah. Therefore, since there was nothing, let's get rid of Jeddah and Mecca. Boom, they go off the screen. Without Jeddah, without Mecca, what happens to Islam? A big red X. Well then, what about the civilizations? Maybe they knew about this place. So let's ask, and Dr. Patricia Conan went around, she asked this question. If Mecca was the oldest city in the history of mankind, someone somewhere should have heard of it. So she went and she looked at all the empires to see what they said. Now remember, she reads and writes 15 languages. So she read everything in its original tongue. The Assyrians, she found nothing about Mecca. The Babylonians, they knew nothing about Mecca. The Roman Empire knew nothing about Mecca. Neither did the Persians. What about those closer to it? Much closer, like the Nabateans. They knew nothing about Mecca. And the Sabaeans knew nothing, and neither did the Himyarites, or the Azdis, or the Kindas, or the Kedarites. None of these people, including the Nubians right across the Red Sea, none of them had heard of Mecca. Not one word. All the way up until the 8th century. What does that say about Mecca to you folks? If it is the center of history, if it's the oldest city in history, if it's where Abraham lived, if all the trade now, north, south, east, west is going through it, why had no one heard of it? Well, what about the other cities that were in that area? Let's ask and see if they are, because there are a lot of cities in that area, or towns, not really cities, they're hamlets. And let's see if history knows about them. Let's look at Najran, which is about 400 miles south of it, a small little town. But Strabo talks about it, Pliny the Elder talks about it, Ptolemy talks about it, Aretas, all of it, it's well known. What about Sana and Taif and Yathrib and Khaybar that are right near Mecca? Yes, they're well known. The Greeks talk about it from the 6th century BC. They refer to these places. Mamre, Pliny has a whole book written on the history of it. Petra, Zukowski has written an entire book on the history of Petra. Maghrib, where Muhammed Mariktan has written another history on it. Why are all these insignificant towns referred to, but not one of them referred to Mecca? I'll tell you why. To know why, take a look at a map and you'll see why. Look at those 4 maps. Those are 4 topographical pictures of Arabia. And what do you notice about Mecca and Medina? Well, the central part where Medina and Mecca are is a desert, right? Where there's the desert, there's no water. Where there's no water, there's no food. Where there's no food, there's no people. Where there's no people, there's no towns. Where there's no towns, there's no cities. Where there's no cities, there's no civilization. Where there is no civilization, there is no history. It's as simple as that. How long did it take me to say that? 10 seconds. And you can do the same. You have to have water, folks. If there's no water, there's no history. That's why it was called Patria Deserta by the Romans. It's always been a desert. That's why none of the prophets could have come there. Nobody has ever heard of it. Just like Mars, without water, there's no point even going there. But we have to go there. Let's go to the Hajj. Because the Hajj is where you need to find out. If the Hajj has been there from the very beginning, then it should be also archaic. It should be the center of history. Am I correct? When you go to the Hajj, and those of you who can't go because you're not Muslims, but you go and you circumambulate that square building called the Kaaba 7 times. Why do you circumambulate 7 times going counterclockwise? Good question. I'm going to tell you. To do that, you need to go to Petra. Petra also has a Kaaba that you circumambulate 7 times going counterclockwise. Why does it have a Kaaba? Well, you need to go to this city. Do you recognize it? Jerusalem. You've got to go back to Jerusalem that also have a Kaaba. Remember, Kaaba means square in Arabic. It also means square in Hebrew. And the Kaaba in Hebrew was the Holy of Holies. And the Jews would circumambulate it 7 times going counterclockwise because of Jericho. God told them to do it 7 times going counterclockwise. They still did it as a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Therefore, the Kaaba that was in Mecca comes from Jerusalem. It gets better than that. After they circumambulate 7 times, they then run back and forth between Safa and Marwa, the 2 mountains that are there. Take a look. Do those look like mountains to you? They're only about 20 feet high. You can climb on them as kids. Those are not mountains. Those are rocks. They're called Marwa and Safa, and the Muslims run back and forth 7 times. Why? Because Hagar is in the desert. She's thrown out of Mecca by Abraham, who's living in Mecca. She runs out of water. She needs to find water for Ishmael. She runs back and forth 7 times between 2 mountains. Folks, those don't look like mountains to me. In fact, hold on a minute. They're only 100 feet away from the Kaaba, which is in the center of Mecca. If she's out in the desert and she can't find water, then what is she only doing 100 feet away? Why don't you just knock on any door and get some water from the neighbors? Can you see there's a problem here, folks? This is not the original Marwa and the original Safa. This is nothing more than a facsimile. This is nothing more than when you go to Las Vegas, you'll see an Eiffel Tower there, right? That's not the original Eiffel Tower. You'll see a pyramid there. That's not the original pyramid. They're nothing more than facsimiles. That's what you're looking at. So where is the original Marwa and Safa? No, some people think it's in Petra. You need to go to Jerusalem. Go to Mount Moriah, where the Temple Mount is. What is the name for Moriah in Arabic? Marwa. You go down to the Kidron Valley and go back up to Mount Scopus. That's what the pilgrims all did. And what is the name of Mount Scopus in Arabic? Safa. So the original Marwa, the original Safa are in Jerusalem. God bless the Muslims. All they did was plagiarize. Everything is plagiarized in Islam. When you look at the Hajj, you can see that the Kaaba is plagiarized. You can see that the Safa and Marwa are plagiarized. You can see that the hill of Arafat, I don't have time to get into it, that's plagiarized. You can see the Jamarats where they throw 49 stones. Why 49? Because it's a multiplication of 7, which is the holy number in Judaism. They've just plagiarized from the Christians. You look at the Zamzam well, that is the same thing, the same word that is used for the well there in Siloam. The pool of Siloam in Jerusalem. And then we get to the black stone. Thank God this is not plagiarized. What in the world is the black stone doing there? On the eastern corner of the Kaaba. Every Muslim, as they circumambulate, they kiss the stone so that they get their sins forgiven. Who can forgive sins but God? This is idolatry, folks. And it's at the very seat of Islam. The very center of Islam is based on idolatry. If Muslims say God is one, then what's that stone doing there? That does not come from Jerusalem. To understand that, I'm not going to go into it because I see I'm running out of time. I need to keep going. Look and go up on Fander Films. We've got all of it up there. We're now unpacking all of this material so you can see it. So can you see? No one could find Mecca place in the Quran. Crone pretty much debunked the trade route theory. Gibson debunked the Qiblas. Crone also debunked, she not only debunked that, but she also debunked the maps, and then we debunked the trade route going through the Red Sea, and then of course the 5 stages of the Hajj. Though Mecca has existed since Adam and Eve in Surah chapter 7 verse 24, there is no evidence of it anywhere until 741. And everything we now find in Mecca, we could find previously in Petra, and now even earlier in Jerusalem. You ready for Muhammad?